want to start with, and we're going to turn to Job chapter 38, and that's where we'll be spending our time this morning. I hope you'll allow me just one moment as I get set up. So we'll be in Job chapter 38 this morning. Now, I know that most of you don't know me. You don't know who I am, where I come from. So this morning, while we're working through Job chapter 38, I hope I can share some about myself with you as well, so that not only do you take away part of the Lord's Word today, but you also get a sense for who I am. Talking about who I am, I want you to imagine for a moment that you're 14 years old again. Just do that for me if you would for a moment. And you're celebrating the 4th of July with family and friends. You see, this is where I was at about 11 years ago. My father was fighting off a severe case of lung cancer, and he had not been doing well for some time. And around this time, July 4th, a time of great celebration that we're usually used to here in the United States, my father had been sent home from the hospital. And as I'm celebrating with my family and some friends that evening, I get a phone call from a sister of mine, one of my father's 3 daughters from another marriage. And had I not been looking for certain things in the phone call, I couldn't have told you what she said. I couldn't hear her. I couldn't understand her. Except I caught 3 words out of the conversation. Dillon, Dad's gone. That broke me. I'm supposed to be celebrating July 4th. But my dad lost his battle to cancer. Ten months later, I'm in an eerily similar situation. I'm moving through my freshman year of high school, and my mother has been ill for several months. The doctors finally, after about 2 months, decide that my mother has leukemia, a very nasty disease. For the brunt of my freshman year in high school, my mother spent her time in the hospital in Oklahoma City. I would spend the afternoons with my family driving from Seminole to Oklahoma City to see her as she underwent her treatment for leukemia. Several times we'd been told that they'd caught it early enough that it would be okay, she'd survive, she'd make it. But just about 9 months after my dad passed, my mother got to come home over my spring break of freshman year of high school. But she only stayed a week before having to go back to the hospital. When she went back to the hospital, this was around the end of April of 2007, they told the family that unfortunately the leukemia had reached her brain and there was nothing else they could do for her but make her comfortable. Several days went by and my mother really didn't respond much. She wasn't awake a lot. I was lucky enough, May the 4th, my 15th birthday, about 10 years ago, to have my family pull me out of school and take me up to the hospital to see my mother. And this was a rare occasion. She was awake, she was laughing, she was happy. She had brightened my birthday with the last of her strength. You see, 3 days after that, not even quite 3 days, 2.5 days, just after midnight, on May the 8th, my aunt, one of my mother's sisters, called and said, "We've lost your mother." At the time, I was too tired to process this information at midnight, 12:15 in the morning. So I went back to bed. But the next morning, I'm staying with my mother's mother, my grandmother, who's at this time 85 years old. My grandmother could not bring herself to make the phone call to the school that I would not be in that morning because my mother had passed away. So I made that phone call. And I wanted to break down and cry. I wanted to throw punches and hit somebody because this just wasn't right for a 15-year-old to go through. You see, the story of Job's a unique story. And if you're noticing a pattern here beyond my story to what we're talking about this morning, that's okay. You see, I tend to embrace this. Job went through a similar situation. Job had everything. A loving wife, plenty of children. He had a home. He had cattle that he raised. Then one day, it was gone. It started with the things he owned, the cattle and the land, and then his family, and then his health. And Job, in his desperation, finds himself sitting in a pile of ashes, scraping himself with a broken clay pot. He is so distraught over what's happened to him, and he cannot comprehend it because he has every day for his life offered sacrifices to the Lord on his behalf, but not just his. He's offered for his family too, for his children, that they may have committed a sin that they weren't aware of. And so throughout the course of Job, the book, Job's sitting here and he's arguing with these so-called friends of his who tell him that he's an awful, vile person because that's the only reason this would happen to you. That's the only reason you would find yourself in such a situation. God doesn't destroy good people. He doesn't do that. And Job is sitting there rebuking his friends because they don't seem to understand. How could he, when he's offered sacrifices for his entire family, for himself, be a vile person? It gets so bad at one point that Job sits down and he curses the day he was ever born. And he wishes that he could just go back and stop himself from being born. Finally, we see back in chapter 24, Job says, "If only I knew where to find God, that I could take my case directly to him. If only I knew where to find him to talk to him." So it's this situation that leads us to Job chapter 38. And starting in verse 1 here in 38, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have the understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? When what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Who enclosed the sea with doors when, bursting forth, it went out from the womb? When I made a cloud its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band? And I placed boundaries on it and set a bolt and doors. And I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther. And here your proud waves stop. Have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? Is it changed like clay under the seal, and they stand forth like a garment? From the wicked their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you understood the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is so great. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle? Where is the way that the light is divided, or the east wind scattered on the earth? Job summoned God, and here he is. In all of his glory and his might, in the whirlwind, Job has been beaten and tattered and broken down. And now the mighty one has appeared. God keeps going here. For the sake of time this morning, I'm not. I hope you're starting to notice this pattern more now. I won't profess to be the cleanest of Christians, and I hope you can know what I mean by that. Certainly, I've had my fair share of scars, so it should come as no surprise to you that I say, I get it. I get it, that I don't get it. And that's perfectly fine. I've been where Job's at. Okay, maybe not exactly here. I've not yet been married to lose a wife. I've not yet owned a home with an expanse of land to raise a great head of cattle like he has, just to have it taken away. I've had some friends who were great choices in my life, or great influences on me. And I've had situations where I just wanted to break down and curse the day I was born, that this should ever happen to me. So I get where Job is at. I understand what he's saying. I've had these sorts of moments in my life, and I'm sure we all have. I told you that I got the call about my dad. That happened about 9 o'clock at night. I was able to process it at that time. I was still awake. The call from my mother came at just after midnight, so I wasn't ready for that call. I couldn't process it at the moment it came in. But the feeling of having to sit across the kitchen table from your 85-year-old grandmother, who cannot bring herself to say the words that her daughter has passed away, who cannot bring herself to tell other people that your mother is gone. having to call the school and tell them myself that I can't come in because my mother's passed. I have things to do for the funeral. I wanted to beat God up. I did the same thing Job did in chapter 24. I said, where is God that I could take my case to him? Because in that moment, I couldn't see him. I didn't understand that. How dare God do that? So where's the silver lining? Where are we in all this? Job's lost everything. He's lost everything he loved in his family. He's lost everything he owned. His friends are horrid to him. And now he's engulfed in a whirlwind, arguing with the Almighty. And not only has God said that Job doesn't get it, back in verse 2, God has set about a course to prove that Job doesn't get it. And this discourse lasts until the end of the book. So where is the happy ending in all this? Where do we turn? Skipping down to verse 39 to finish the chapter off. Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? When they crouch in their dens and lie in wait in their lair, who prepares for the raven its nourishment when its young cry to God and wander about without food? I hope that flips a light switch for you. That should sound, if you'll excuse me there for a moment, a bit familiar to us, because we've heard that one before. That's our silver lining. Luke chapter 12 and verse 24, Jesus is speaking, and Jesus says, "Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap. They have no storeroom and barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds." God goes through this discourse in chapter 38, and he says, Job, you don't get it. And he demonstrates, Job, you don't get it. And then he stops right here at the end of this chapter, and he says, here's the silver lining. No, Job, you can't hunt for the lions, but yet they still survive. No, Job, you don't prepare the nourishment for the ravens, but how much more worth are you than the birds? And now we've come full circle. How much more are we worth than the birds? After all of that, here I am. 10 years removed, and I'm preaching to a congregation of believers. I didn't give up. And I'll admit that I've probably thrown more than enough punches to give God a few black eyes. But that's okay. That's what God wants from us. I know that I don't get it. And I know that that's frustrating, that I don't get it. I can't understand the plan here, and that upsets me. I can't see where things are going, and I'm scared and confused, and I get angry because I can't direct what I see. And God gets that. He understands it. I have to be honest, I don't think that I've ever heard this passage preached like this before. I'll admit it. I don't think I've heard any preacher stand behind a pulpit and deliver this sermon like this before. Most people, they want to treat this just in passing, with a colloquialism that we've all learned to take to heart, that God can take it, He's big enough. No. I don't think that's quite right. Yes, I think God can take it because God wants to take it from us. God wants these moments from us where we throw our punches at Him and give Him black eyes and bruises. But I don't think it's because He's big enough. I think the idea is better served being expanded. He can take it, yes. It's not simply that He's big enough. He's big enough to see the entire picture. God is with that 15-year-old boy when he's lost his mother. And at the same time, He's right here today as that same boy preaches a sermon. God sees the entire picture. It's not because He's big that He takes it. It's because He knows what's coming on the other side. God will take the black eyes from us because He knows that He gets a gold medal in the end. God doesn't care if we throw our punches and if we break His bones, because He'll come out the victor at the end of the match. That's why He takes it. He sees that we can come through the other side, even if we don't.
Come to Jesus, He will save.